way of Will John.
And then they started to make funny comments about the receptionist in Serbian.
Right.
And I started to laugh because it was funny,
Right.
you know? And then they started to give me this look like, there's no way.
Right.
There's got to be no way, you know? So, all right, guys, what's up? After about 1 million technical difficulties and working through all of the time zones and everything, I am here with Steve Kauffman. What's going on? How are you?
I am fine, thank you. I'm in Vancouver.
Yeah. Okay, you're in Vancouver, and
yeah.
I'm in Sweden. So
You're in Sweden. Wow. Okay.
Yeah. Oh, I didn't tell you. Okay. Yeah. So things are good. I've been a fan for quite some time. So I've known about you for forever. And obviously as a guy who's learned a whole lot of languages, and it's not just that. I mean, I'm digging deeper. You're an entrepreneur. You've done quite a bit, you know, and as a business, really cool what you've created. So why don't you tell everybody what you're about? You know, can you give us a story of you?
Sure. First of all, Sweden is a country that I have a sort of a connection to because I was born there and lived there until the age of 5. And I did a lot of business in Sweden. We used to buy lumber there, which we sold into Japan. But personally, so I was briefly, I was a Canadian diplomat for 7 years. Then I worked in the forest industry for, 45 years, including setting up my own company, which deals in the, trade in forest products. But the last 15 years or so, I've been really interested in learning languages. I learned some languages, during my career in the wood industry, and that's a diplomat. But particularly in the last 15 years, with the advent of, MP3 technology and the internet and Netflix and YouTube, I mean, there's so many wonderful ways to learn languages that since the age of 60, I've learned, 10 or 11 languages. And right now I'm working on Persian and Arabic. And other than that, I'm a grandfather with 2 sons and 5 grandchildren.
Wow.
And I like to stay physically active.
On how does one do that?
Well,
how do you do that?
I mean, lots of things. Like I do something every day in terms of working out. So, there's various routines you can pull off the, off YouTube, mixing in some burpees with some squats, with some, push-ups. I have
gotta get you
Nordic track. I have a stepper. I go running around the schoolyard, whatever. Just try and get in about half an hour a day, all the while listening to my language, whether it be Arabic or Persian or whatever I'm working on at the time.
Okay. So I got 2 questions before we even get in, because that's a lot to go. You were a Canadian diplomat. I didn't even know that in checking all the things. What was that like? There had to have been some really... And sorry, what did you do?
It was very interesting. I got very interested in, just to step back from that, I got very interested in French, in the French language, and spent 3 years in France as a student there. And then I wrote my foreign service exam in French as an Anglophone, which probably helped me get accepted. So then I was accepted into the diplomatic service as a trade commissioner. And my first assignment was to go to Hong Kong and learn Mandarin Chinese. This is in 1968. Thereafter, I went in and out of China during the Cultural Revolution, which was very, very interesting. And then after that, I went to Japan and worked in the embassy there. And as a trade commissioner, your main activity was helping Canadian business people or, preparing for trade negotiations or, following up on what's happening in the economy of the country that you're assigned to, things of that nature. Sending reports to Ottawa that nobody reads, going to cocktail parties. I mean, there's all kinds of stuff.
Yeah. Okay. Wow, that's really interesting. So yeah, we, as a company, a few of us, we were at, I'm a U.S. Soccer Foundation ambassador.
Okay.
They host an event in Washington, D.C. where they kind of just draw up some teams of guys that are currently playing, guys and girls actually, that are currently playing, and some that are former professionals. And they have the whole, Washington, D.C. Cocktail party with all of the, the donors and that whole jazz. And we got to meet a couple diplomats from Denmark, I believe it was, which was really, really interesting because coincidentally, the last time I'd met anybody in that circle was when I was playing in Denmark, and there were 2 Americans on my team, and we got to do something with the ambassador, the American ambassador to Denmark there, which is really cool. But I just remember asking about it's a job and a name. When you hear this, everybody has something in their heads.
Right.
Diplomat, embassy. You don't really know, And so I remember trying to ask these guys, like, what do you do every day? Like, well, we go to these things and we go to these parties and then we write all this and then we do all this. And they seem incredibly busy, but I was envious of the travel and the fact that they get to meet people from everywhere. They're practicing like, oh, I practice this language then and do this, that. So really cool.
It's got an aura about it, but a lot of the work, it can be interesting. Depends where you get to serve. Obviously, people want to serve in exotic destinations, but a lot of the work I personally was happy to get out of it because, it's quite bureaucratic.
There's no danger involved in your.
Well, it depends where you are. I was in China during the Cultural Revolution. We heard gunshots off in the distance, but I haven't been in a war zone. I didn't serve in Yugoslavia or the Congo or something. So it wasn't dangerous at all. It's a little inconvenient. You're constantly packing and moving to another location, and you have no choice as to where you're going to go. So you might be sent, as a Canadian trade commissioner, 1/3 of the postings are in the U.S. So you join the diplomatic service to go to somewhere exotic and you get sent to Cleveland or Buffalo, so.
Yeah.
Not so exotic.
Well, So then why don't you try and catch us up with languages then now? We might as well dig in there because I know you don't even know really my background to an extent.
I was going to say, though, I'm very envious. Canadians are very envious of the U.S. Soccer team's success because there was a stage when Canada and the U.S. more or less were even in soccer. And now it's not even close. So the U.S. has done something really good with their soccer program. Get to go to the World Cup, and Canada still struggles to get out of the CONCACAF or whatever.
You say that, but USA didn't make the last World Cup. And as a matter of fact, Canada is on the uprise right now.
Wow.
Yeah. So maybe if you're not paying too much attention, obviously. So in 2026, the World Cup will be basically in North America.
Correct.
It's all split there. But Canada is doing quite well in football. You guys? Is it soccer in Canada? You guys say soccer?
Soccer.
You guys say soccer too?
Yeah,
okay.
Yeah, we say soccer.
Interesting.
But insofar as languages are concerned, so during my career, as a diplomat, I was sent to Hong Kong to learn Mandarin, which I did, and then I served in Japan, so I learned Japanese, and then I worked in the forest industry, first of all with large corporations, and then I set up my own company, and so the Japanese was very useful to me. I sort of learned my Swedish back because we had supply in Sweden. Traveled. I learned a bunch of languages sort of while working, and without being aware of this sort of input-based learning. You're familiar with Stephen Krashen, right? Stephen Krashen
No, I don't think so.
All right. He's a very important name in language learning, language acquisition. He's a professor at UCLA, I believe, who has written very good books on how we learn. And people think they learn languages by studying grammar or that they can just talk their way to learning languages. And actually we learn by sort of through input, listening and reading. And I wasn't aware of what Krashen had written, but that had always been my way of learning. So whether I was in Hong Kong learning Mandarin or whether I decided that I was going to learn German, I always just committed myself to doing a lot of listening and reading. And I wrote about that experience 15 years or so ago, and I spoke 9 languages, but I'm now up to 20. So it's really since the age of 60. And also because with my son Mark, we created this platform called Link. And so I've been learning on Link. I think the first language that I really went at with Link was Russian. And I just, it's now that I'm, 74 and it's what I do. I learn languages and I'm very much involved in the whole language learning via the internet, using Link and all that kind of stuff. Totally. Just fascinates me.
Yeah. No, yeah, it's absolutely fascinating, obviously, to see all the people that have come on, your YouTube channel. So, guys, yeah, he has probably closing in or maybe even around 200,000 subscribers at the moment, I would imagine, and has all sorts of people from all walks of life. Every once in a while, I see people. So Benny, the Irish Polyglot
Oh,
was,
yeah.
I don't know if you've had him. He was on the podcast just a couple weeks ago.
Okay.
I've been planning things with Moses, who I know you've talked
yeah.
to.
Yeah.
We just haven't sorted out, when we're
Right.
going to do it. But it's, and within the whole language thing, it's funny for me because as a footballer, I've traveled the world, and most people assume also that I picked up all of my languages while playing.
Right.
But the truth is, yes. So Spanish came early into the game while I was quite young.
Mm-hmm.
But Italian, before I'd ever set foot in Italy, German, without ever having truly spent any time there.
Mm-hmm.
Both those languages were essentially learned, and I started to learn French while I was in Denmark. So a couple of the languages, I saw, as a matter of fact, I saw you speaking of the complexity of learning Croatian.
Right.
Just a little while ago when you were there, which, by the way, how amazing is the coast of Croatia? You mentioned in there.
It's just unbelievable.
It's so unreal, beautiful. Right?
So
it's the people.
You got to stop your car every 5 minutes to take a picture, as you're driving along.
It's insane.
Yeah.
I tell people that it's in my top 5, and I think I've been to somewhere in the 60s. I really should count, but I've 60, near 70 countries, and I'm always amazed. I can't wait to go and do more. But so with everything you have, how do you set your goals? What's your active languages? How many of these have you weaved into your life? And what would you, maybe I should stop there before I ask for the guys that are listening.
Weaving into your life is an interesting question. When I think of professional athletes, they, obviously if you're in Denmark, there's a disincentive to learn the language because everybody there speaks English so well. But,
totally.
If you are in a place where they don't speak the language well, or conversely, if you see foreign athletes who come to North America, like we see hockey players who come and play, who might be Russian or Czech or whatever, they learn English very, very well, and they end up speaking well. Much better than the professor, at university who no one can understand, who never really speaks well. And I think playing on a sports team where you want to be with your teammates, you want to be part of your teammates' life. I mean, my son played professional hockey for 10 years. He was in Italy and Austria and Switzerland and Japan. And when the boys were young, we tried to get them to learn languages they wouldn't learn. But once he played on these hockey teams overseas, he realized that languages are important.
Huge advantage.
So I think that is not a condition for learning languages. I learned Mandarin in Hong Kong where no one spoke Mandarin. I have met people in places like China and Japan who have studied, or in Europe for that matter, who have committed to learning a language and have never been to the country where the language is spoken, and yet they learn it. So obviously the more you immerse yourself in that society, the better you do. But I've learned most of my languages here in Vancouver, especially in the recent period here in Vancouver, with the goal of going to the country eventually to use it. But you can learn a lot on your own if you're motivated and disciplined, and especially today with the internet and Netflix and all the stuff that's out there.
So how do you, if you could break it down? I mean, because we have a lot of guys, all these guys, our fan base is quite worldwide, as the game is, a worldwide sport.
For sure.
And we get questions because from time to time I will throw different languages into the videos just for fun, and the guys like to see the fact that someone's speaking in their language and they don't expect it, especially black guys speaking Eastern European languages. It's just it's a rarity, right? You're always shocked. And it never fails to be in a place where I hear some Russian or any of the Serbo-Croatian, Bosnia, Macedonia, any of those languages, and they 100% are sure that I don't speak. Because especially if you're not there, if you're in, which has happened to me, I'm in Sweden, and a couple of Serbian people walked in, and they were trying to speak to the receptionist. They were speaking in German. The receptionist didn't speak German, so I helped them check in. And then they started to make funny comments about the receptionist in Serbian. And I started to laugh because it was funny, And then they started to give me this look like, "There's no way. There's got to be no way," So it's always something that happens. But for these guys that are, all ages, and just like you said, I mean, it does not matter where you are. I mean, it's the thing that you start Do you have a way of breaking things down for the guy who said, I would love to learn a language. I don't know where to start. What do I do?
Yeah, I think, first of all, the way we learn languages at school and the way we are conditioned to think languages are learned is we learn the grammar, we try to master the grammar, we try to master some words, put it together, and then we can speak. That's not how the brain learns languages. The brain is a pattern extraction machine. If you bombard the brain with enough language content, listening and reading, either because you're immersed in it and surrounded by it, or because you listen to things on, as I do, on my iPhone or whatever, and read, or I use Link because I can then listen. I don't understand it. I can read it. I can save words, review words. So, my system, that's where I spent all my language learning time. But the point is, bombard your brain with the language. Then you can look at some of the grammatical explanations and they might make sense, but don't try to remember them. They might help you notice certain things in the language. Then you continue feeding the language to your brain. The brain will gradually sort it out. When you have a good level of comprehension, when you have a sufficient vocabulary, you'll start to feel confident that you can speak. And when you start speaking, you'll be very clumsy. But if you keep speaking and keep listening, you'll gradually get better. And that's all it is. It's not more complicated than that. But you have to do it every day. So I get up in the morning. I'll grab I have an iPod Touch because it's easier if I go jogging or something. But I'll take that, put my AirPods in, and go and prepare breakfast. So that's 20 minutes that I'm listening. I might pull up, depending on the language, I might pull in a podcast in Arabic, or I might take we have these mini stories in Link where there's a lot of repetition of high frequency verbs. So I alternate between difficult material and easy material. And there's always gaps, things I don't understand. So after I've listened, and I listen again when I clean up after breakfast, or I might have to drive to the office, so I listen. And then I got to read that to figure out what it was that I was listening to, because I'm only going to understand, let's say, at an early stage in the language, 10, 20, 30%. So then I read it, I look up the words, I say phrases, I review the words and phrases, I listen again, I understand a bit more, and it's just a gradual process. It's this slow snowball going down the hill, and you slowly pick up more and more, and you're not even aware of when these phrases and words are soaking in or being retained by your brain. It's something that the brain does on its own, but it does. The brain learns. It's a learning machine, and we have to trust it, basically.
Yeah. So do you, now in doing that, so you do a lot of, I guess, would this be considered active listening in a sense, or is it more incredibly passive in the sense that you're trying to, like you said, bombard your so right now you're doing Arabic. Are you starting from a beginner stage? Like, in Arabic, do you have any
I started
backing?
I started absolutely as a beginner. And so I had to learn the writing system, which is difficult. And it takes a long time to get used to a different writing system. Even if you know what the letters, what they represent in terms of sound, for your brain to get used to that takes a long time. So I've read lots and lots and lots in Arabic. But when I start, we have these 60 mini stories. In each mini story, the same story kind of repeats 5 times because we tell it in the first person and the third person, or present tense, past tense. And then we ask questions. We say that Will plays soccer is a statement. Comes out of the story. Then we say, does Will play hockey? No, Will plays soccer. You're given the statement. You're given the answer. It's just more exposure. But with each question, there's another 3 exposures to that structure, to that vocabulary. So the mini stories, which I have listened to 30, 40 times, are a great, each of them. Not all at once, mind you, but they build up your sense of the language. And then at a certain point, you feel, now I want to go after something a little more interesting. So then I go to Al Jazeera podcasts or something of that nature, where there's a lot of unknown vocabulary and where I have to look it all up. But this is all done online. It's done within Link. I review these. It's just what initially might have 50% unknown words in it, and we track how many unknown words there are. After a few months, it's 30% unknown words, and once you get to 15% unknown words, it's kind of a sweet spot where you're acquiring more words, and yet it's not too difficult. So you want to be in an area where it's not too difficult and not too easy, and then you get a great sense of achievement. So it's time. What can I say?
Yeah.
Time and attitude. Time and attitude.
Okay. So once you've passed all that and done all that, and now you've got to test yourself in the field, or so I guess I have two questions. One, how do you feel after you've listened and basically done all that, and then you go and you make an attempt in the field? So when was the first time you do that? How's that go? And then
obviously, I usually do better than I expect, because obviously if you were to read a book on how to swim and then you jump in the water, you're a little bit concerned. How am I going to do, So obviously, like, I was learning my Arabic, and then there's a little shop here that sells coffee beans, and a couple of Algerian guys in there. So I go in there and I surprise them with my Arabic, and I do fairly well, I guess. The thing is, most of those kinds of encounters, similarly with Persian here, there's a lot of Iranians in Vancouver. You can, they really appreciate it when you speak their language. But of course, you're going to use very limited vocabulary in those kinds of encounters, right? You say, yeah, I'm learning Arabic. I'm learning, it's a nice day. Thank you. Goodbye. You're not having an in-depth conversation. My goal in language learning is to get to where I can actually have meaningful conversations. So we can talk about the situation in Syria in Arabic. We can talk about, and so I like to sort of build up to that. I have a collaborator in Iran. She's probably a 30-year-old. You don't know, a lady, girl, woman, whatever. She has created a lot of content for us at Link, including a 25-episode history of Iran starting 2,500 years ago, in her own words, relatively easy. So I'm acquiring that kind of vocabulary. I don't just want to be able to go to a restaurant and chat up the waiter, or you want to have a clerk. I want to be where I want to understand. Like, we're watching a movie now with my wife. We're watching this Lebanese movie. I want to get to where I can understand the movie.
Yeah. Yeah. Exactly. Yeah. Being situational about your approach is also one of the keys that I've clearly found. I mean, and like you talked about, the nonsense of the way that the school system is set up. And obviously I can't speak for Canada. I can speak for the US and I've said this on numerous podcasts. I took Spanish with all of my friends, and they all took at least 3 years, maybe in high school, and then another 2 at least. None of them can speak any Spanish at all. And I want to ask whoever it is that is really in charge, when have you ever spent 5 years, roughly doing something and gotten nothing out of it? I mean, if I was not even I'm not a basketball player, but I feel if I shot for 5 years straight, I would come out with something. But most of these people, they study the language and they don't come out with anything. And that's a huge issue to me. But so do you have one active language that you were studying at the time, or do you study multiple now that I know it's different when you're trying to maintain 20 languages. So how do you do this?
Typically in the past, I would focus on one at a time. I focused on Russian or Czech, Ukrainian. Before going to Romania, before going to Greece, I would work on those languages because I had a specific goal in mind. But right now, I'm just playing with sort of 2 languages, Persian and Arabic. I started out doing Persian, Arabic, and Turkish, but I found that to be a bit too much.
Sure.
But I do want to learn all 3. So the question is, should you do a little bit of all 3 so that you don't fall behind too far in one of them? Or should you focus on one? So I kind of vary. Right now, I'm kind of focusing in on Arabic because Arabic has the standard Arabic, which is not anyone's native language, but which is the language of podcasts, the language of the news, the written language. They all learn it in school, but when you go to Lebanon, they speak Levantine. You go to Egypt, they speak Egyptian. So I want to kind of get a handle of those 3, at least those 3, Levantine, Egyptian, and standard Arabic. So I'm kind of focusing in on Arabic, but I miss my Persian because we have such good content in Persian. So, I mean, I'm a dilettante right now, right? I'm 74, I do what I want. But if you're, if you need it, let's say that you're going to be sent to, I don't know, Brazil to play soccer. You've got a job opportunity there. You want to focus in on the one language, and you're going to focus in on Portuguese.
Yeah. Yeah, it's been really interesting. So some of my languages have come as a necessity
Right.
of being in the country. And once again, when I was in Denmark, I chose to learn Danish. It was
Okay.
a decision
Yeah.
clearly not needed
Right.
whatsoever. Their English is better than ours
Yeah.
at this rate. But there are some places, and playing in Croatia when I was there first.
Oh, where were you in
Uh,
Croatia, by the way?
I was in Zagreb.
Oh,
So
yeah.
I actually started. I was playing in Denmark. I made a transfer to a team in Belgrade,
Right.
Serbia,
Right.
and was there for less than a year or so, and then to Croatia. And where I first actually came into Croatia was Beograd na Moru,
Right.
which is in the south. A really nice vacation spot. Everybody goes there and stuff. And then I ended up in Zagreb for
Right.
the giant portion of my career there in Croatia. So, and now I'm losing even the point where I was going with all that. I have absolutely no idea.
Um. Well,
Started
we were
talking
talking a bit about immersion.
oh
One thing, yeah.
oh no, go ahead,
No,
go
no. I
ahead,
was
tell
going
me.
to say one thing you mentioned about people not expecting a black person to speak a Slavic language. You
Mhm.
know, it is interesting the sort of identification people have with how we look in the language we speak. I mean, there are so many Asian Americans who only speak English. Not to
Totally,
mention
yeah.
African Americans. How come they speak English? They should only be able to speak African languages. Why would you
Yeah.
identify it that way? I got quite keen on Ukrainian, and there are a few African Ukrainians. I think one's a member of parliament. I think one's a wrestler
Yeah,
for them.
I've been there. Yeah, there's a
And,
decent
and
number of
these guys are
prominent ones.
like
Yeah.
they're Ukrainian. Like, why would they not be able to speak the language? I know that I read somewhere that in Shanghai, some people sell an operation on your tongue so that you can pronounce English better.
What?
Yeah.
And how does that work?
Well, it
Do
doesn't
they?
work, obviously, but people have this perception that, you know, to speak English,
It's
you
an
got to look
innate.
like a white guy, or to
Yeah.
speak, yeah. So of course,
Right.
which is really, and I always make the point when we're learning languages, the culture is not in the DNA, and that's important. If you're learning languages, you won't become whatever it is language you're learning, but you can actually imitate them. The culture is out there as separate from the DNA. It's not tied to the DNA of the people. And every country is actually a mixture of many different, you know, people
Exactly.
of different origins, and they come together around a certain culture or around a certain language. So, but I had a funny experience. I was in Brazil, and we went to the Christ the Redeemer, and there were three Chinese men standing together looking at these two Asian, young women, and making comments about them and saying, "Oh, I wonder if she's Japanese or Korean. Oh, look at her legs. You can tell by looking at her legs." So I said to them in Mandarin, I was standing right beside them. So I said to them in
Yeah.
Mandarin and Chinese, I said, "Do you want me to ask them?" So, great
They're
shock.
surprised.
Silence.
Yeah. Oh no. Oh no. Totally. Right.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. It is one of the funniest things, but it is weird. I guess it depends on where you are. I guess people feel a certain level of. I mean, there's that split. We still, while it's clearly becoming more and more, or sorry, less and less blurred. There's a clear split between the East and the West, especially when we're talking about China specifically,
Right.
in how the cultures, and not to mention now, I mean, I haven't been to China yet, but I have friends there, and the fact that they have to deal with the firewall and Google and just
Oh,
it's
yeah,
just,
yeah.
there's just a barrier there.
Right.
I mean, everybody has their ways around it. They have VPNs, et cetera, but it is phenomenally tough to really say that the cultures have gotten this full wide open look. You almost need to go
Right.
to Asia.
But that is their political system, because if you go to Taiwan, they have total access to
It's completely open. Yeah,
cultures all around
to
the
everything.
world. So,
Yeah.
and of course, culturally, people are different. But again, it's the culture. It's the culture.
Right.
It's not the DNA. It's not. You can have a third generation Chinese American or Canadian who is not at all connected to their culture as it now exists in Taiwan or China.
Yeah.